Hi, this is Devin from the Retrievers. I wanted to take you through a recent case that we had involving this dog, JD, because I think it's a good example of how to use community information in order to know where to put a trap to find a dog that may be moving all over town. JD is a young Springer mix, we believe, who got away from a volunteer while he was on a walk in New Ulm, Minnesota. New Ulm is a town of about 14,000 people. It's not huge, but it's also sizable enough to get some real community involvement. And so there was a lot of awareness when JD went missing. The Humane Society is right here where this star is. And this is more or less the point of flight. So JD was loose and being seen mostly initially around this area by the Humane Society down in these woods and surrounding areas in these woods, even right here. But pretty soon he left this area and started being seen all over town. The Humane Society had initially put out a have a heart or a smaller trap for him, but JD had been trapped before. He had been caught as a stray after being on the loose for 2 months in an adjoining town, and so he was pretty trap savvy, and he wouldn't go in their trap. And so eventually they contacted us after he'd been out about 3.5 weeks. So the first thing we started to do was to plot where the sightings were. And so when we got involved, JD was over here in this part of town. We got a couple of sightings down here by this brewery. And so we put our first feeding station over here. Now we wanted to get it a little bit closer, but because of terrain and permissions, property permissions and so on, we ended up putting it over here. And we did not see JD on camera at this feeding station at all. But in the meantime, we were collecting more sightings. And here he pops up way over here. He was still roaming, but we began to see this cluster of sightings. And it eventually, we started working on presumed routes. How was he getting around town? We had two hypothetical routes. This magenta one here, we thought he might be traipsing, between this wooded area and this wooded area because he had been seen in here. But also this yellow route, and we extended it out toward where the Humane Society had been because we thought he might also be traveling that way to where he first went loose. So then we started to get even more sighting calls, and once these sighting calls came in, we could really see this cluster over here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And what this turned out to be, you can see this wooded area. This is a very steep ridge. There's very little human foot traffic along in here. These are private property yards that extend up and down from these houses on the hill and below the hill. And so what we discovered is that JD was using game trails along this ridge to get around, in a secluded area. And so he was probably moving right along where our first yellow presumed route was drawn. Now, this gave us a lot of good information. We began to see sightings right up in here. He seemed to favor this area for popping out and being seen. So we put another feeding station. We moved this one, and we put it over in this area here. Now, the trick with where we put feeding stations is we not only want to get on the dog's route, but we need to find a spot big enough to put our large missy trap, and it also needed to be flat. We were very lucky to find a little plateau right here on this ridge. Of course, we always monitor feeding stations to make sure we know what is eating the food, and so we had our little Arlo camera on the feeding station when JD visited, and you can see him discovering the food for the first time. That confirmed that we were in the right spot, and to be absolutely sure before we put the trap out, we got a second visit from him on camera, and then we knew that we pretty much had found his route. Now, JD had been using this route, for a while, and we knew that when we put a trap in his path, this great big foreign object, he may not approach it. In fact, there's always a risk that a big foreign object like this could cause the dog to change his route entirely. So rather than putting the camera just on the trap, we decided to aim it down the path where we think he thought he was coming from, so that we could see whether he shows up at all, whether he balks at approaching the trap, and that kind of thing. So this is the first sight of JD after we put the trap up. He seemed to be a little bit wary, but at least we didn't scare him away entirely. The trap is actually just out of the frame here. We put a bowl of food right next to it to encourage JD to come close. We wanted to see just how close he would come to the trap. And you can see that he did go for the food here. So that gave us a lot of good information in terms of what our next step would be. So that night, we turned the camera around. We locked the trap open. We wanted to see, what was his behavior inside the trap. And we were very glad to see that he actually went all the way inside. We had food, of course, leading into the trap. We had a bowl about midway. JD was the kind of dog that liked to grab the bowl and have it to go. But this video showed us that he would go in all the way, and so he was ready to be trapped. And here is the capture video. JD went in halfway, grabbed the bowl, and headed out, as you'll see. And then eventually he went all the way to the back of the trap, where we have our ray tripper trap triggering system. It has an invisible beam that the dog walks through, and that releases an electromagnet that slams the gate closed. Our team was waiting up the hill. I'll show you exactly where this was. Here was the trap right in this location. And this is a steep hill going down that way. And our team was right here watching the video to make sure that they would respond quickly after he was trapped. And you can see that he got a little bit rowdy in the trap, and it was a good thing that they were able to respond as quickly as they did. So that is JD's story. The most important thing being is that when you have a dog on the move, it's really, really critical to get sightings. You need to know where he is being seen so that you can develop these hypothetical routes and then sort of prove with future sightings that he's going where you think he's going. When a dog is not hanging around a particular place, this is really your best bet at knowing where to place a trap. So put a feeding station in his path first, verify that you've actually found his route, and then deploy a trap. So I hope this has been helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.